Hello friends, and welcome to Ariel's Twilight Years, how to be a really old model. I am delighted today to be joined by a collaboration of my sister model colleagues. This is something I've wanted to do for a long time, and the recent videos I've done about model safety have resulted in me getting a lot of emails from models, many of them much younger and much newer than me, who've had bad experiences. And I was left feeling I want to help as many models as I can not have bad experiences in this industry that I absolutely love. But there is a small contingent of people who try to prey on models in various ways. And I realised that drawing on only my own experiences isn't really enough. I really wanted to be able to share the experiences of models who work in different genres from me, with differing levels of experience and across different countries. I contacted many of my sister model colleagues and asked them to tell us what genres of modelling they work in, and then describe one of the bad experiences they've had during their careers and what advice they'd give other models as a result of what they experienced. I often think about my long career as a kind of forest that I've wandered through, and sometimes I've gone in the wrong directions and met people I would rather not have met. And now I look back through that forest and I want to leave the clearest, safest path that I can for the people who come behind me. So this is my attempt and my sister's model's attempt to make that path well lit and safe.
Hi, I'm Kitty Quinzel. I've been modelling for 11 years. I initially started as a fashion model, but then I moved on to art news, erotic news, and fetish.
Hello everybody, my name is Faye and I have been modelling since 2006. My first shoot was a solo continental shoot for a top shelf magazine, and that's where my levels basically stayed, apart from I've added various sort of fetish work into the mix.
Hi, my name is Scarlett Fox. I've been modelling for 10 years. I work up to art nude.
The story that I want to tell is one of my most recent happenings, if you like. I organised a shoot with this person. I was told by a few models and by photographers, even my partner at the time told me that this person was safe to work with. So we organised a shoot which would be no more than topless. It would be topless and it would be lingerie and no further. It was a bondage shoot, so I ended up roped to a frame with my arms and my legs, and I was also gagged, so I couldn't talk. I think I was about half an hour into the shoot. It all been going wonderfully. It all felt really good, and then I ended up in this very vulnerable position, and sadly after that point, the photographer then asked me whether or not I was shaved, and then he put his hand down my pants to find out whether or not I was telling the truth. It wasn't a nude shoot. We hadn't agreed to it. There was no reason at all for him to do that. I couldn't shout out because I was gagged. I couldn't kick him because my legs wouldn't move. They were roped up. He used my vulnerability to take advantage of me. People will probably say that I'm the one that put myself in that position, but I want to make this very clear. No matter who you are, no matter what you model, we do not ask for this. Everything should be consensual. If it's not consensual, it's not on.
Now, like most models, I commute to the vast majority of my shoots across long distances. I don't drive, which means that I rely on the public transport system, and this has in the past created various issues on problematic shoots. Several years ago I did a shoot and it was in the region of 4 to 5 hours away from my location on the train. Now, I worked out that I could get there and back in the day if I set off really early, and then I'd be looking at getting potentially the last train back and arriving back at home 1 a.m. in the morning. I mentioned this to the photographer, and it was going to be a long day for me, and I just wanted him to sort of bear that in mind so that we could work the timings out to suit everybody. I managed to get the train to where he was. He collected me from the station and we drove what was potentially maybe 10 to 15 minutes to his house. But when I got there, it was very much a rent-a-friend situation. I don't think that he was as invested in his ideas as what he had been pre-shoot comms. It was very much, let's talk about your personal life or his personal life. It can be quite difficult to say, shall we shoot something now? Because you can only sort of ask that so many times before it seems like you're badgering somebody. I mentioned that we should probably get on, and I said, there's a train at 9 o'clock. And he assured me that if I missed this train, I absolutely would be able to stay at his house. I said, well, that's very kind, but I need to get back because I'm working tomorrow. This seemed to surprise him. He said, well, what do you do? And I said, well, I'm a model. It was kind of getting closer and closer to 9 o'clock, and I said, should we be wrapping things up? It's 5 minutes to the station. It might be 5 minutes to the station, but we've still got the paperwork to do. I'd have to pack my case. It was 10 to 9, and I sort of said, look, if you're not going to take me to the station now, I'm going to have to call a taxi and go to the station. And this is when he made this reveal that we're not going to make it now. You're obviously going to have to stay because obviously you've missed your train. So this is when I said to him, well, there is actually another train. It's in an hour. He seemed quite put out by the fact that I was going to be able to get home. A couple of weeks later, I spoke to a friend of mine, and she'd had the exact same experience, except she had to stay over because she'd missed the train.
So this particular situation happened to me about 3 years ago, and I'd only been modelling art nude at this point for about 2 years. I'd been booked for a group shoot at a studio that I'd worked at previously many times before. I knew all of the photographers bar one. I started the shoot off with introducing myself to the one photographer that didn't know me. We were going to be working through fashion, lingerie, and finishing with half an hour of art nude right at the end. And everyone was going to be working on a one-to-one basis with me on a set timer. Doing the fashion set, which I was wearing a skirt, shirt, and heels, I noticed that the one photographer who I didn't know and was very sheepish to actually introduce himself to me was stood right at the back of the studio, laid on the floor, taking pictures. Now, I'm all for somebody trying to have a look at what the light's doing, but when they've also got a trigger on and it's setting off the lights, I wasn't particularly happy with that because I had no idea if the photographer I actually was working with was the one taking those shots or not. I also realised that after a time that he was desperately trying to get upskirt shots of me, which I don't advertise and don't do. So it came to his turn and everyone said, right, it's your turn, go up. And he said no. So I decided to walk up to him. I said, you're more than welcome to take shots of me. And he said, no, I'm happy not to. I went and got changed. We got changed into doing a lingerie set. He wasn't interested in taking shots of that either, but again, he was more than happy to sit at the other end of the room, setting off the lights constantly, to the point where I actually stopped the shoot to just ask the gentleman at the back if he would mind to stop taking photos. He did stop for a little while until I was on photographer number 6 and he started it up again. So at that point I stopped the shoot and I walked back over to him to ask him if he would please take his trigger off, which he was happy to do. I went back to shooting. It came to the last photographer, which was him, and I asked him if he wanted to shoot any of the lingerie and he said no. So I went off, came back out in my dressing gown, disrobed and started doing my art nude poses, to which everyone else, good as gold, no paparazziing whatsoever. However, he started moving around the studio trying to get shots between my legs. I don't do any form of open leg, so I was absolutely flaming, to be honest, because I ended up stopping the shoot entirely, asking my poor photographer that I was working with to say, would you mind stopping for a few minutes? And I ended up galloping over to the other end of the studio where I decided to start taking photos from, and had stupidly not known that I'd know what a zoom lens looks like. So I ended up bawling him out of the studio and telling him that he could not be so disrespectful, that everyone has paid the exact same amount of money as him, and yet he was trying to get extra shots in there, and shots that I didn't consent to either. I never got one apology, and he swiftly left the studio, to which I let the studio owner know, and that photographer is now banned. Some people are ridiculous.
My word of advice for models would be to plan an escape route. Plan an escape route and make sure that you have somebody who knows where you are. Give them the address of where you are and set up an SOS message that you can send to them that won't alert the person you're with. Make sure that you get the help that you need. Stay safe.
If I'd had my own transport, like a car, I wouldn't have had to have worried at all. I would have just been able to say, well, we're going to wrap the shoot up. I'm going to get in my car and drive away. Because safety isn't always just the obvious things like, has he assaulted anybody? Is he going to be inappropriate on the shoot? Sometimes it's about simple things like bad timekeeping. So in that instance, what I always try to do is make sure that you've got a train available that's not the last train, and then if anything goes wrong, you can then rely on having to get the last train, and it doesn't mean that you're stranded where you are. If you know anybody that does drive, that can be somebody that picks you up in an emergency. I've had to rely on that a few times. Probably the best advice I could give you is to learn to drive, which is what people keep telling me, but I keep saying I'll do it next year. I never do it.
I think if I have any advice for any new models, or any advice I could have given myself 10 years ago, is that if anything makes you uncomfortable, and I don't care how trivial it is, just say no. If you don't want to do it, don't. And if somebody makes you uncomfortable, walk out. There's nothing more to it.
Hi, my name is Sophia Smith. I am an ageing glamour model.
Hi, my name is Lauren Jade. I have been working as a freelance model for 2 years now. My specialty is fashion. It's most of what I shoot. It's what I love shooting.
Hi, I'm Artemis Fauna and I have been a model now for 11 years. I've always worked up to art nude levels.
I feel kind of lucky, which is a really sad way to think of it, that I don't have many horror stories from the industry. The only one I can really think of was really early on in my career. The job was for publication and professional. He put me in a very uncomfortable situation, and we were shooting in his home for a calendar, which did go to publication, kind of to add insult to injury. And we were shooting in his home, and it was kind of a military style calendar, and he had this great idea, which actually was extremely believable when I was 18. He said, why don't we go shoot in the woods, in the forest? And I thought, it makes sense. Military, you want to look a bit incognito? Makes sense. It was a very believable lie. Anyway, I don't need to go into details about what happened in the forest, other than it then transpired afterwards that he had done the same thing to other young girls, and also not so young girls, women. He'd done this to them as well, the exact same thing. And to be honest, didn't really feel like there was a lot I could do other than warn other people. Didn't really want to go to the police, didn't feel like it would be very believable. I had met this man on the internet and gone to his house to do a photo shoot.
My worst shoot experience was sadly my first ever shoot. It was booked through a relatively popular site and was with a friend of mine who had been modelling for a couple of months at the time. The photographer booked an Airbnb. We were given a time to be there, and we were told that the theme was 7 Deadly Sins. He told us we would be shooting in bikinis and said that he'd ordered some online for us to wear. Just me being me, liking to be over-prepared, I decided to take a couple of my own anyway, just in case they didn't fit. He said he'd ordered them in a size small, and sometimes I have to get extra small, sometimes I have to get small, so I just decided to take my own. Thankfully, I did. We showed up to the Airbnb, he asked us to change into the bikinis, and he didn't quite tell us the extent to what the bikinis covered or didn't cover. We put them on, and I knew when I looked at it, it was a strip of fabric for the bikini bottom, and that wasn't going to cover much. It was also massively too big, and I just wasn't comfortable with what it was showing. I went back out, I told him the issue, I said it doesn't fit, and it's showing a bit more than I would like it to, so I have these 3 bikinis. If you'd like to pick one, I can put that on. He kind of huffed and puffed a bit. We kind of laughed it off, joked about it, and I put on the bikini that I brought with me. At that point, we started shooting, and it was all going fine, and then he said, oh, I have some Prosecco bottles left over from my last shoot. Do you girls want a drink? And immediately I was a bit like, oh, maybe not. But my friend said, yeah, we can have a glass of Prosecco, that's fine. So I thought, okay, she's been modelling longer than I have. Maybe it's normal. Maybe it's part of the glamour of modelling. And so he poured us a glass of Prosecco. I just kind of sipped a little bit. I don't really like Prosecco. And we got to shooting. I noticed very quickly that every time my friend and I were taking a drink, or we were like swapping the set or whatever, moving props around, he was filling up the glasses
without asking us, which meant that when I thought I drank 1 glass of Prosecco, I'd probably drank 3 or 4. The shoot was going okay. I didn't notice it at the time, but my friend did mention to me that he was flirting quite heavily with me. I was in a relationship at the time, so just absolutely didn't notice. But in hindsight, there was a lot of flirting going on, despite him being twice my age. A couple of inappropriate comments about my body, but I just kind of brushed it off. It was my first shoot. We got to the last sin, which was lust, and my friend and I, being friends at the time, we were like, we can do this. And then we were shooting, and right at the very end he says, will you guys make out with each other? I said no immediately. As I said before, I was in a relationship. I hadn't spoken to my partner about this. There was going to be photographic evidence of this, and it wasn't something I was incredibly comfortable with. He was pushing, oh, it'll be fun, it's fine, your boyfriend will be fine with it. My friend was kind of saying, yeah, it's all fine. So I just went ahead and did it. There was a lot of pressure. Afterwards, we were leaving the shoot, and I just broke down crying to my friend, and she kind of understood where I was coming from at that point. We got the photos back in the end. I didn't particularly like them. I try not to think about that shoot a lot, but it definitely made me think about what I do going forward.
This photographer, unknown to me, he had arrived at my house. My partner at the time had let him in, and I didn't find this out till later, but for some reason this photographer had got undressed in the kitchen into clothes that I then, when I came down, he was wearing. So I met this guy and he was fine, and we were shooting and everything was going great, and my boyfriend came up to say he was popping to the shops, and literally as if by magic, as soon as the door shut, his whole demeanour totally changed. He stopped shooting me, he put his camera on his lap, and he just said to me and my wife don't have a good sex life. And I was like, where did that come from? It was really weird. So I just kind of looked at him. I tried to sort of ignore it. In these situations, it's very difficult to sometimes call people out on bad behaviour straight away because you're on your own, they're in your house, they know where you live, and you're weighing up, is it worth it almost, which isn't really the right way. So we carry on shooting, and he says a couple of other strange things and comments on my posing and how free I can be with him, and don't worry if you show too much, all this kind of classic stuff, you can trust me. I've been around a long time, you get an idea of what people are like, when they're not being genuine. And this guy was just full of absolute rubbish, basically. I actually spoke to him after he said it a few times, and I said, look, could you please stop saying things like that, because it's really inappropriate. And he seemed to back off a little bit, but he kept saying, I'm going to keep booking you, you're going to make a lot of money from me, as if you put up with my naughty behaviour, it'll be worth your time. And I just remember thinking, Christ, you're torn in this situation, and looking back with a clearer mind now, just it couldn't be more gross. So it was all this, and then obviously the grand finale for this one guy. I mean, he literally, in the space of 3 hours, he just managed to just about break every rule possible. I was walking down my stairs to finish the last set downstairs. As I was coming down the stairs, he walked out of my kitchen topless. So I think he just had his trousers on, his belly was out, and I remember just instantly freezing because I thought, why on earth is this man half naked in my house? And I just looked at him and then sort of said, oh my God, and then ran into the room, and he came in, oh sorry, I was just getting changed again. It's just all a silly game. And then we had to finish the shoot. I wanted to say to him, what are you doing? But I just thought, do you know what, I'll email him later, and I did. I wrote it all down clearly and told him that he shouldn't be behaving that way. After that shoot, I got in touch with a couple of other full-time models who also said that they had a similar experience of him actually getting undressed in studios. So it was clearly a pattern, and I reported him to the website I was using, and he got removed.
The main piece of advice I would give any models, new, recurring, A, don't drink on shoots, and B, if something feels wrong, put your foot down and say no. Don't feel pressured into doing anything you're uncomfortable with or anything that wasn't discussed beforehand, because that's your absolute right.
I've been doing this 17 years, and I have been full-time for 13 years, and I wouldn't have been able to do that without having formed relationships with all these different people, because I can trust their feedback and therefore avoid the awful situations. You have to form these friendships. It's really important as well not to be desperate. Now, this might seem a little bit mean, but I see it all the time, and a lot of newbies fall into bad situations due to being so desperate to be in the industry. When you start off, the rates are really not very good, and you really have to work your way up to get good, consistent work and a decent hourly rate. When you weigh up, is this worth it? I really need to pay my rent. The desperation of needing to pay the rent takes over. I have been in that position where I've thought, oh God, I really need to pay my rent. I have to do the shoot with this creep. I have to do it. It's not worth it. There are so many other ways to make money in this industry that putting yourself in a vulnerable and volatile situation will never ever ever pay off. It's totally possible to 100% monetize yourself without anybody else's involvement. So please don't be desperate. I am always happy to tell models how you can monetize yourself. Just get in touch.
I suppose my advice rolling on from my story is to say to any model, new or experienced, please never be afraid to report somebody's behaviour. Even if I could have just shrugged that off as like he was a little bit eccentric or strange, but no, he was inappropriate, and trust your instincts on it, because these guys that do this will play a game with you to try and make you seem as if you are imagining things or you are wrong. And yeah, if you need to contact other more experienced models for some backup or help or support, then, you know, please do.
Hi everyone, I'm Hannah Ashling, but you might also know me as Twinkle Nose. I am a art nude model based down in the southwest. I've been modelling for 2.5 years.
Hi, I'm Faith Roswell, and before I retired from modelling to become a cage fighter, my name was Roswell Ivory. I modelled up to and including art nude level for about 14 years.
I was a life model for 10 years. I usually did public classes or private group art classes.
Hi, my name is Lauren Kiley. I have been a professional fetish model and performer since 2011.
When I first started modelling, so we talk about sort of 5 months in, I had a photographer become really obsessed with me. He also pushed all of my levels to shooting nude. I was only a lingerie fashion model first. In the end, I actually ended up calling the police from this particular photographer, as he had so much control over me, from me writing his references all the way through to saying things about my partner, really getting in my head in a really negative way. I did have a really bad experience. It did nearly put me off modelling altogether. But ever since I was able to actually come forward and break away from his grasp, my work has improved drastically, and everyone can see it as well. He has since told everybody that it was all me and everything, so I was obsessed with him. Like, he had to turn me down because he was married and all I wanted was sex from him. And it's just like there are still studios and models and photographers with bad taste about me in their mouths. I have had a couple of negative experiences, but the positive definitely outweigh the negative for me. And I have an incredible support bubble. There is so much support in this industry. You just don't need to know where to look for it. Any model will always be on your side. Actually, I found models are incredible. Like, I've never had this kind of support before from people. I've met some of my best friends through modelling, and it's amazing.
On some occasions, I would be asked if I would do private work in someone's house, and usually that went fine. But on one occasion, I was asked by a man if I would do a private job for him. I said yes. I did the session, and halfway through this session, the man said to me, "When I'm drawing you, I'm not just drawing you, I'm fucking you." I was old enough to laugh it off to some extent, but felt that the artist uses as a modus operandi to get guys. If I'd been younger and more vulnerable, I would have found that situation much more difficult, though I still found it quite intimidating.
I was in my early 20s and I had just moved to a new city, and a very well-known photographer immediately messaged me. I got there and the shoot went pretty well. We shot for a few hours and we had done some light bondage. I had been topless. I think we'd done a forced orgasm scene, and after the shoot he sat me down and we looked at all the photographs and he edited them in front of me and showed me what he was editing. With certain photographers I've done this, it has been friendly and informative, and I've become a much better model because we've gone through it and been like, oh, you see how this pose does that, or hey, you see how your face caught the light or it didn't catch the light. But this didn't feel like that. This was, here, I'm pushing your ass to make it rounder because your ass is really flat. Like, I felt bad, and not just about my modeling, but about like my body. He criticized me for, you could see like a hair on my butt when you super zoomed in. And then he showed me other content he had shot. So by this time, he's been really criticizing me for hours of the day. And so he starts showing me other pictures of other models that are increasingly more graphic, to the point where he's showing me pictures of people displaying their genitals mid-urination. And I didn't know these people, and I didn't ask to see these pictures. And then, in case you couldn't guess where this was going, he was like, you know, you could make a lot of money if you did pictures like this, and I wouldn't even charge you to take those pictures of you. So I never worked with him again.
And the most violating experience I've had in a long time as a model was at a camera club. I was working with someone nude, one-on-one, while the other people were in the background talking amongst themselves, and I misheard their conversation. What I heard was news of the suicide of somebody that I knew. So in the universal gesture of, give me a second, I asked the photographer shooting me to give me a second. He didn't do this. He continued photographing my naked body while I yelled at him to stop. Now, we quickly determined that the person who had died is not someone I knew, so I turned back to this man and I said, I want you to delete those pictures. He said, why? They're in focus. And I said, I don't care. You've got a naked woman reacting to the news of what she thought at the time was her friend's suicide. He responded by raising the camera and photographing my nude body again.
I would say to new models that you should always do your research into a photographer. This photographer who became obsessed with me, he was actually shooting in my home, and he would just sort of turn up at my doorstep as well, and I was like, okay. Just because when you join up to a site there's all these photographers wanting to shoot you, just take your time. It's better to have quality over quantity. You'll have all of these people just trying to get free shoots out of you and everything. It will be really intimidating, really overwhelming, and please don't believe the myth as well that I got told when I first started modelling, that you will only ever have paid work if you are a nude model. That's not true at all. You just need to find your niche, you need to find what you're good at, and you need to really hone in on that and be like, yes, this is me, this is my jam, and network.
So my advice for models is always to be wary. It doesn't matter if someone is kind and courteous and gentlemanly like, they could still have a predatory side to them. So as in a friendship, I expect the same within a working relationship, in that I have to build trust over a long period of time. And certainly with a working relationship between a model and an artist or a photographer, that trust really does have to be built over a long time, because for the model, they're most vulnerable when they work with an artist, and a good artist will realise that the model is vulnerable and do their best to make them feel at ease and not intimidate them.
What I would say to another model who may find herself in that situation is, one, if you're uncomfortable, you could leave. I could have left. He had already done the pictures, done the paperwork. I just felt like it was polite. I felt like he was right because he was older and more experienced. My advice is the same as it ever is. Community, community, community. Have friends in the industry. If you can, get other sex workers to take your picture. That is the best shoots and some of the best pictures ever taken from me. Please feel free to contact me for any other information.
The idea that your career will suffer if you out someone is a big old lie. The only thing it's going to do is deter other creeps from working with you. If someone starts getting flirty or level pushy in pre-shoot communications, that's a big old red flag. Tell them what they said is completely unacceptable, because it is much better to do that from behind a computer screen than it is to have to do that in a room where you may be alone and naked with them and they owe you money. And if you know that someone is a creep, stop working with them. Stand with us, because the only way that we can get any kind of change in this industry is if perpetrators start to see consequences for their actions.
I'm Ariel Anderson. I work primarily in artistic nude and BDSM modelling from a submissive perspective. So I star in films about spanking and caning.
My name is Penny Dreadful. I have been modelling since 2001. I am a plus size model. I have done art nude shoots, I've done topless shoots.
Hello, I'm Lucy, otherwise known as UK Cute Girl. I've been modelling now about 5 years full time. I absolutely love it, and I wouldn't want to do anything else now that I do it.
I wasn't a new model, but I was completely new to this genre. It was only my third shoot in the spanking world at all. When I got to the shoot, I met the other two models, and that was my first warning that things were not right. I said, "Are you here for the spanking shoot?" And they both said, "No." "What spanking shoot?" It turns out that they had not been briefed by the producer that there was going to be any spanking at all. The two people who were going to be doing the spankings arrived. As soon as the actual spanking started, it became apparent that the other two models were pretty traumatised by it. They'd not expected this to happen to them at the shoot, and the action was a lot harder than I would have expected either. We struggled through, all three of us, until they then said towards the end of the day that we were going to have to do caning. Now, caning, of the various spanking implements that can be used in a shoot, is the one that's likely to cause the most pain, but also the most long-lasting bruises. That's exactly the sort of thing that should be discussed beforehand. So I had at least been caned before. The other two models really didn't know what they were agreeing to, so to their great credit, they both said no. One of them said no immediately, and the other one took 6 strokes and then said absolutely not, no more. So at this point, a producer with any semblance of decency would have stopped. But instead, what the producer did was turn to me and said, "Oh, well, you'll have to take all the remaining strokes yourself." Instead of me getting 18 strokes, I was going to get 3 times 18 strokes. That's not acceptable by any stretch of the imagination. But I was so new, and I was so aware of how much money was being spent because we were on location, there were all these performers, there were multiple members of crew, and I felt this huge responsibility to the production. It's my job to facilitate them getting as much caning as they need. So they caned me so hard and for so long, and so inaccurately, that I was left bleeding. And looking back, I am so angry. At the time, I didn't know who was to blame. I didn't blame the performers doing it because they were only doing what they'd been told to by the producer. And then I didn't blame the producer because it wasn't actually him physically doing it to me, and I didn't know how to stop the job. So we finished, we got paid our £200 each. I was bleeding, one of the other models was bleeding. To great credit of one of the models, she went to the police afterwards. I couldn't say I'd been assaulted myself because at least I had known on some level what to expect from the shoot, but I could certainly give a witness statement supporting the fact that it had been an absolutely horrendous experience for this model.
I'd been booked to do a shoot with a very well-known commercial photographer whose work was the sort of stuff that you would see in newspapers and magazines. Beautiful work, really. And I was very excited to work with him, and he had quite a lot of references listed online. So many references, in fact, that I didn't fully check through them all to see whether or not there were any negatives. There were actually quite a few negative references that I had missed during my initial background checks. So I went along to this photo shoot with him, and we had our plans set out for the day. The shoot seemed to be going well, and then he started to suggest ideas that we had not discussed beforehand, one of which was to portray sexual harassment in the workplace. So for this I had a very nice business outfit on, and he decided to go over to a rack that was in the studio which did have gentlemen's clothes on it, and decided to strip into his business attire. He suggested that he would have his hand on screen as though he was trying to grab me at work, and I was to look shocked. This did set alarm bells ringing a little bit, but it didn't bother me because as far as I was concerned, he wasn't going to be touching me, and he didn't touch me. As I changed into another outfit, we were having a discussion. This was the second alarm bell. He started talking about a very well-known modelling industry site that I was on at the time, and I did not realise that he had been kicked off that modelling site. He also further went on to talk about a few models of whom I've not worked with, but I knew their names. Bad-mouthing people in general, which is an uncomfortable feeling on a photo shoot anyway. A bit later on in the same day, we did another set which was supposed to be advertising a beauty salon, and for these photos I was laid face down on a massage table, underwear on, but I had a towel tucked into the top of my knickers, so that then he said, "Oh, should we take some pictures just to see the shape of your bum?" He removed the towel, which was fine, I allowed him to do that, and he was taking pictures of my bum in underwear, and he said this is not showing off enough shape, and without any warning just used his hand to push my underwear in between my bottom cheeks to increase the shape for the pictures. I went a bit quiet, but I carried on shooting with him anyway because he just carried on as if nothing had happened. But we weren't too far from the end of the shoot by that point. He wanted some portrait pictures which were neck and shoulders, and we took some fantastic portrait shots. I got up to go and get changed into the next outfit, and our conversation had been about weight and size. I was talking about how I was trying to lose weight, and at that point he said to me, so long as you don't lose any weight off these, and proceeded to grab my breast. And I was in shock. Just kind of went and got changed, and thankfully it was very close to the end of the shoot. Looking back after the shoot, it was an escalation of behaviour throughout the entire shoot. It was only on the train home that I realised that there was an issue here, and at that point I spoke to my fellow models about it, one model in particular actually, and she was very helpful. You can't laugh that off, that is realistically an assault on yourself. I eventually did call the police. Unfortunately for me, because of the fact that it had just been me and him in the studio, they weren't able to progress with my report, even though I wasn't the only model that this had happened to.
There has been a few incidences that I didn't quite like, and I'm going to tell you about the one that sort of affected me the most. I never told anyone. The reason why I didn't want to tell anyone about it is because I felt so stupid that I went along with it. This photographer, local to me, from Purpleport, said, hey, I want to shoot you, we're going to go out on a boat, it's going to be a really nice few hours, we'll just do some art nudes on a boat and maybe a beach or things like that. He had a few references, so I was like, let's go. So I went down there and met him, and we went out on his little crappy boat, and he was like, oh, I'm a naturist as well, do you mind if I get naked? I'm out on the boat in the middle of the ocean. I didn't want to say no, which sounds stupid, and I beat myself up over it. But I should have just said no, don't be stupid. But I didn't, and I was like, well, I'm fine being naked, you can be naked if you want, like, that's fine. But it didn't stop there. So he was naked on this boat while I was doing adult poses and things, and I was feeling really uncomfortable. There's nowhere that I could run. If I showered, no one's going to help me. Then he was like, oh, I've always wanted to do some modelling. And I was like, okay, yeah, right. And he was like, well, would you mind taking some pictures of me? And I was like, oh God, okay. And I just felt so uncomfortable in that position, and he made it sound so normal, and I was really new at modelling. Thought if I said no, I'd be being a bit prudish or rude. And then when I was taking pictures, when I had the camera and when I had the camera, he just started wanking in front of me. And I was like, I'm just really embarrassed about it. That's why I'm like upset about it. It's not even that bad. No, I didn't want to sound prudish, which was the stupidest thing ever, and he was wanking in front of me. Anyway, he didn't like do anything more than that, so I was really lucky, but I just felt really vulnerable in that sort of position.
This is the advice I'd give you, and actually, whether or not you work in the corporal punishment world, this advice stands. I looked up a thing called stop work authority, and it's used in other industries, and the principle of it is that anyone in a work situation has the authority to stop a job if they see something dangerous. Of the two things, a production and your body is more important. Your body is always more important than any production or any piece of art. And that is the advice I would tell you, whether you're a corporal punishment model or an art nude model or a fashion model. You'll be asked to climb up ladders or trees or rocks, and if you don't feel safe, you shouldn't do it, because you're the one who's taking responsibility for doing it, so you're the one with the right to stop it.
But you should always do as many checks as you can before going on a photo shoot, and trust your instincts. If you discover that you are in a situation where you feel uncomfortable, that something isn't quite right, just say to the photographer you need to go to the toilets, or you need to go and touch up your makeup, and get away from them and have a think about your next steps. It is a job, and you should be able to feel safe in your workplace. Do the right thing for the next models that will be potentially working with them. report them, leave them negative references, let people know when they're looking for references what your true experience was like. Any kind of endorsement for him could mean that that could happen to somebody else. Please do not endorse photographers who are indulging in grooming behaviour and escalations of behaviour that lead to bad things happening to your fellow models.
My advice to anyone is, just because you're new at this, you don't know what's right in the industry and what's wrong in the industry. There is no right and wrong. You've basically got to go with exactly what you feel like. If you feel uncomfortable in a situation, you just say straight away. And I've learned ever since then, as soon as anyone says anything that makes me a bit uncomfortable, even if it seems ridiculous, if it makes you uncomfortable, just say no and say, I'm not happy with this, I'm going. It sounds like really obvious advice, but it's not.
Thank you to my sister models for joining me in this project, which is so dear to my heart. I hate to give anyone a bad impression of this industry because, of course, most photographers are not predators at all. But because every model I know has at least one or two absolute horror stories, we have to acknowledge that we've got some kind of systemic problem in our industry, and that predatory people who are attracted to the model photography world do tend to exhibit the patterns of behaviour we've discussed in this video. I hope this video also demonstrates that the issue isn't specific to any particular genre. Fully clothed fashion models can be met with exactly the same type of bad behaviour that hardcore porn stars are. We're speaking out because we want our industry to be as good as it can be for models, but also for all the good, decent photographers too. We don't want to go to work feeling suspicious of you. We want to relax and do good work with you, with mutual respect just taken for granted. So having honest conversations about the bad things we've experienced feels important for improving the industry for everyone. To models watching this video, I am sorry that there will always be more would-be predators trying to join the photography community, but hopefully this video will have helped you to spot some of the patterns that they tend to exhibit. Watch out for inappropriate pre-shoot communications, escalations of bad behaviour, level pushing and emotional manipulation before, during and after the shoot on occasions. It's lucky that most predatory photographers aren't magically sophisticated in their methods, so you will see the same patterns of behaviour over and over again, which makes it much easier to spot. Please take any opportunity you can to get in touch with more experienced models if you think we can help. We want to help you. You're often at your most vulnerable when you're a new model, as you may have seen from this video, because predatory photographers will often specifically target us because we're new, hoping that we won't know what's unacceptable yet, or that we might not have the confidence yet to say so. So educating yourself early and learning to communicate assertively as soon as possible, it's really valuable. And even if you're an established model like me, remembering to stay vigilant and remaining comfortable with saying no is still really important, and honestly, it stays challenging in some situations. Our actions send a message to other models and to our potential clients. By speaking out and sharing information when we encounter predators, and as Penny says, by refusing to endorse photographers who've behaved badly, we send signals not just to other models about how to navigate this industry safely, but we also send signals to our future photographers that we require a safe and mutually respectful working environment. Stay safe, everyone, and enjoy the wonderful people in this incredible industry. There are many, and it has been my privilege to share some of them with you in this video. Thank you to my sister models for adding your valuable voices and experience to mine.